Ethan Sterling, the CEO of a multimillion-dollar food company, is used to his life running as smoothly as his luxury sports car, until it suddenly breaks down on a deserted road. He is taken aback when a homeless man named Marcus offers to help. What Ethan doesn't know is that Marcus was once a renowned master mechanic whose life was derailed by prejudice. In a brilliant display of skill, Marcus repairs the car in less than an hour, leaving the arrogant Ethan both stunned and humbled. But was this unexpected encounter the beginning of Marcus's downfall, or the turning point that would change his life forever? If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Marcus, the Maestro Jenkins. The name once resonated like the purr of a perfectly tuned V12 engine in the most exclusive circles of automotive obsession. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a virtuoso, a mechanical savant who could diagnose a car's ailment by the subtle tremor in its chassis or the faintest whisper from its exhaust. His hands, calloused but precise, were rumored to be able to reassemble a camshaft blindfolded. For years, his small, immaculate workshop, tucked away in an unassuming corner of the city, was a pilgrimage site for discerning collectors. They brought him million-dollar relics: a '63 Ferrari 250 GTO with a misfiring cylinder, a '57 Jaguar D-Type with a mysterious oil leak, a Bugatti Veyron with an inexplicable dip in its performance. When a car was beyond hope, when other mechanics threw up their hands in defeat, they called the maestro. He would spend days, sometimes weeks, with a single vehicle, his body a contortion of focused energy as he delved into its guts, his mind a database of schematics and possibilities. His reputation was his currency, and it was a boundless fortune. Clients didn't ask for quotes. They simply paid the bill, knowing the quality of his work was priceless. They trusted him implicitly, and for a long time, that trust was the foundation of his world. He worked with a singular passion, not for the money but for the beauty of the machine. The rumble of a restored engine, the seamless glide of a polished chassis, these were his symphonies. His life was a perfectly calibrated machine, humming along in blissful rhythm. He had a modest home, a comfortable routine, and the respect of an entire industry. His dream was simple: to buy a small plot of land, build a larger workshop, and take on a few apprentices, passing on the legacy of his unique craft. He wanted to show a new generation that there was artistry in the grit and grime of a garage. But that dream, like so many others, was about to be seized and crushed beneath the weight of a world that didn't care about his hands, only the color of his skin. The final crescendo in his symphony of success was a classic, a 1938 Mercedes-Benz 540K Special Roadster, owned by a notoriously arrogant and powerful man named Sterling Thorne. Thorne was a collector of rare automobiles, but his true passion was collecting praise and prestige. He'd heard of the maestro and, against his own ingrained prejudices, decided to give him a shot. The car, a stunning piece of history, was suffering from a subtle but persistent stutter at high speeds. Thorne, a man whose sneering face seemed perpetually set in an expression of disdain, dropped the car off with a condescending list of instructions. "Don't scratch it, don't break it, don't even look at it wrong, boy." The words, heavy with casual racism, stung, but Marcus had heard worse. He took a deep breath and focused on the car. He spent 3 days poring over every inch, from the fuel lines to the ignition system. The issue was obscure: a minute imperfection in the timing of the distributor cap, a flaw so small it was a wonder the car ran at all. Marcus meticulously rebuilt and recalibrated the component, his hands moving with the grace of a surgeon. The fix was flawless. When Thorne returned, he was immediately skeptical. He refused to believe a man like Marcus could fix something that had baffled his own expensive, white mechanics. He took the car for a test drive, pushing it to its limits. The stutter was gone. The engine hummed with a newfound power. But instead of praise, Thorne's face contorted in anger. He returned to the shop, not with a check but with a fabricated accusation. "You've replaced the original parts with cheap aftermarket junk," he snarled, pointing to the distributor cap, a part he knew nothing about. "You're a fraud, and you've defiled a piece of art." Marcus tried to explain, to show him the intricate work, but Thorne wasn't listening. He had his narrative, and it was a familiar one. A black man must have cheated. He stormed out, leaving the car and a trail of vitriol. Over the next few weeks, Thorne used his immense wealth and influence to systematically dismantle Marcus's reputation. He called other collectors, whispering lies about shoddy work and inflated prices. He posted scathing, fictional reviews online, painting Marcus as a thief and a charlatan. The maestro's reputation, so carefully built over a lifetime of dedicated work, crumbled in a matter of weeks. The phone stopped ringing. The cars stopped coming. The financial spiral was swift and brutal. With no clients, he couldn't pay his rent. He sold off the tools that were once extensions of his hands, each sale a physical and spiritual amputation. The wrench that had serviced a Formula One race car, the torque meter that had fine-tuned countless masterpieces, all gone. The workshop, once a temple of mechanical worship, was repossessed. Marcus lost not just his business but his passion, his identity, and his home. The injustice was a relentless, crushing weight. It wasn't about the money, it was about the lie, the theft of his life's work. The fire in his eyes, the one that had burned so brightly whenever he looked at an engine, was snuffed out. He drifted through the city, his once crisp mechanic's jumpsuit replaced by threadbare clothes, his home a park bench, a bus shelter, or a cardboard box. The once revered maestro was now just another shadow on the street. He now lived on the fringe of a world that had rejected him, moving with the quiet resignation of a man who no longer had a destination. The city's noise, once a mere backdrop to his focused work, was now an assault on his senses. He learned to read the rhythm of the streets, to find a quiet corner for a moment's rest. He had almost forgotten the feeling of an engine's vibration through his fingertips. Almost. But sometimes when a luxury car roared past, he would turn his head, and for a split second, a spark would return to his eyes. He would see not a car but a complex puzzle, a challenge his mind still craved. He was a man lost to his past, but his past was a part of him that could never be erased, no matter how hard the world tried. It was on one of these aimless wanderings that he found himself on a winding stretch of highway, just as a sleek black sports car, its engine suddenly silenced, came to a grinding halt 100 yards ahead. The maestro, once an artist of motion, was standing still, watching. His new chapter was about to begin, but he didn't know it yet. He just saw a broken machine, and for a moment he felt a faint, familiar pull. Ethan Sterling. The name was synonymous with innovation, success, and ruthlessness in the food industry. He was the CEO of Sterling Foods, a global conglomerate that had swallowed up smaller brands and dominated the market with relentless efficiency. From the organic oat milk in a trendy cafe to the frozen pizza in a suburban freezer, his empire's reach was staggering. Ethan hadn't inherited this behemoth, he had built it. He'd taken his father's modestly successful regional snack company and, through a combination of shrewd acquisitions, aggressive marketing, and a cold, calculating disregard for tradition, had transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. He saw the world as a game of chess, and he was always thinking 10 moves ahead, sacrificing pawns without a second thought to secure the ultimate victory. To Ethan, people were not individuals with complex lives and passions. They were resources. His employees were cogs in the machine, to be optimized for maximum output. His competitors were obstacles to be eliminated. The consumers were data points on a spreadsheet, their desires to be analyzed and manipulated. This worldview, while alienating, had made him extraordinarily wealthy. He had a penthouse that overlooked the city, a fleet of luxury vehicles, and a wardrobe tailored to perfection. Yet he was a man who took no joy in his possessions. The joy came from the acquisition, the conquest. The thrill was in the climb, not the view from the top. He was perpetually in motion, his mind a whirlwind of market projections, quarterly reports, and strategic plans. To be still was to be stagnant, and to be stagnant was to fail. The car he drove was a physical manifestation of his philosophy, a bespoke, hyper-performance sports car, its carbon fiber chassis as sleek and unyielding as his business model. It wasn't a car, it was a weapon. It went from 0 to 60 in a blur, its engine a controlled, violent roar that announced his presence. He loved the sensation of speed, of leaving everything and everyone behind, a metaphor for his life's journey. Today, however, that weapon felt like a liability. He was late for a high-stakes meeting with potential investors, a meeting that could greenlight a massive new expansion. He'd been delayed by a traffic snarl on the main highway, and in his impatience had decided to take a winding, less-traveled road, a shortcut that promised to save him precious minutes. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pavement as he pushed the car to its limits, the speedometer needle a blur. He was in his element, a man in a hurry, in control, a king on the open road. Then without warning the engine coughed. It was a single jarring hiccup, a sound that made Ethan's heart pound with a primal, unfamiliar fear. He immediately downshifted, but the car's roar was replaced by a sputtering, weak gasp. He felt the loss of power, the deceleration, and the sickening sense of being out of control. The car, his mechanical masterpiece, had betrayed him. He coasted to a stop on the shoulder of the road, the silence deafening after the engine's ferocious song. He sat there, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, his mind refusing to accept what had happened. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. Things didn't just break down in his life. He was a man who commanded, who fixed, who had a team of people to ensure nothing ever went wrong. He took out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for his personal mechanic, a man he paid an exorbitant retainer to be on call for such an unlikely event. But the signal was dead. The remote, winding road was a digital void. He got out of the car, slamming the door in frustration. He kicked the tire, a senseless, angry gesture that did nothing but ache in his foot. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the air was growing cool. He stared at the sleek black car, its perfect lines now seeming mocking in their inert stillness. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an insult to his carefully curated world. He wasn't used to being helpless. He wasn't used to being at the mercy of chance, or of something as mundane as a mechanical failure. His face, usually a mask of calm superiority, was contorted with a mixture of disbelief and impotent rage. He was stranded, alone on a dark road, the very symbol of his success now a useless monument to his vulnerability. As he paced back and forth, he heard a sound, the scuff of old shoes on the gravel. He turned, his body tensing, and saw a figure emerge from the deepening gloom. The man was old, with a grizzled beard and tired eyes, his clothes a patchwork of poverty. He was a ghost from a world Ethan had only ever seen from the tinted window of his car. Ethan felt a wave of revulsion and impatience. He didn't have time for this. He needed to be rescued, not hassled. But the man kept walking toward him, a quiet presence in the overwhelming stillness of the night. It was an intrusion, a grotesque interruption to the carefully managed narrative of his life. He was a king in a kingdom where everything had a price, and this man, this vagabond, had nothing to offer. He prepared to dismiss him with a wave of his hand, a disdainful look, a curt word. He had no idea that the man was about to offer him something money could never buy. The faint scuff of shoes on gravel grew closer, a sound as alien to Ethan's world as a hiccup in a stock market projection. He turned, his body coiled with tension, his mind already formulating a dismissive retort. The figure that emerged from the shadows was a specter of everything he had successfully left behind. It was a man, hunched and weary, with a grizzled beard that obscured a face carved by hardship. His clothes were a testament to a life lived on the fringes, a frayed, faded jacket and torn jeans held together by sheer will. He wasn't a threat, Ethan realized, but an annoyance. A distraction he could not afford. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze not on Ethan but on the car. Ethan straightened up, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the man's worn attire. He didn't wait for the man to speak. "Look, I don't have any cash on me," he said, his voice clipped and cold, a practiced tone of dismissal. He expected the usual mumbled request, the outstretched hand, the pathetic plea. But the man didn't move. He just stared at the sports car, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. It wasn't the avarice Ethan was used to seeing, but a quiet, intense focus. After a long, unsettling moment, the man's tired eyes finally met Ethan's. There was no subservience, no hunger, just a weary clarity that made Ethan deeply uncomfortable. "She's a beautiful machine," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed out of place in the silence. "But she's unhappy." Ethan scoffed, the sound a sharp, derisive burst of air. "She's broken," he corrected, his impatience flaring. "And I'm late. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm trying to figure out how to get a tow truck out here." "A tow truck won't know," the man replied, his gaze returning to the car. "They'll just pull her away and charge you a fortune. She needs a touch, not a tow." Ethan's laugh was brittle and humorless. "A touch? And you're going to give it to her? Is that what this is? You think you're some kind of car whisperer?" He gestured at the man's tattered appearance. "I'm a CEO, not an idiot. I have the best mechanics in the world on retainer. They get flown in to fix my cars." He let the word "flown" hang in the air, a silent but potent insult. The man didn't flinch. He walked slowly around the front of the car, his movements fluid and deliberate. He ran a hand along the cool metal, a gesture so gentle it seemed almost reverent. "She's not just a car," he murmured, more to himself than to Ethan. "She's a work of art. Her heart is hurting." He knelt down, his body protesting the movement with a soft groan, and peered underneath the chassis. He didn't touch anything, didn't use any tools. He simply observed. Ethan watched with a mixture of annoyance and morbid curiosity. The man was a caricature of a hobo, a living embodiment of everything Ethan had worked so hard to escape and despise. The sheer audacity of this man's quiet confidence was infuriating. "What exactly are you doing?" Ethan demanded, his voice laced with venom. "Are you going to tell me you can see the engine from there? Is that part of your mystical touch?" He couldn't help himself. He felt a malicious glee at the thought of putting this man in his place, of shattering his pathetic delusion. The man stood up, his joints audibly cracking. "The fuel pump," he stated matter-of-factly. "It's not getting enough pressure." But the sound wasn't a clog. "It's an electrical issue with the relay. The solenoid is fried. You can hear it if you know what to listen for." Ethan was momentarily stunned into silence. He hadn't told the man a thing about the car. How could he possibly know what was wrong? He dismissed it as a lucky guess. "A good guess, I'll give you that," Ethan said, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "But unless you've got a spare fuel pump relay in your back pocket, your diagnosis is worthless." He pulled out his wallet, a thick wad of bills tucked neatly inside. "Here," he said, peeling off a $100 bill and holding it out. "For your time. Now please go." The man looked at the money, then at Ethan, and a flicker of something, not anger but a deep, sorrowful disappointment, crossed his face. He didn't take the bill. He reached into his tattered backpack and pulled out a small worn leather pouch. He unzipped it, and from its depths, he carefully removed a single gleaming metallic object. It was a perfectly polished torque wrench, its head a marvel of engineering, its handle smooth and worn from a lifetime of use. It was the only tool he had left, a final, cherished relic of his past life, a physical extension of the maestro's hands. He held it out, not to Ethan but as if to the car itself, a silent promise. "No money," he said, his voice flat. "Just a fix." Ethan stared at the single tool. A torque wrench. The most precise, specialized tool a mechanic could have. He looked at the man's hands, which, despite the dirt and calluses, seemed to hold an innate authority. The contrast between the man's appearance and his quiet dignity, between his poverty and the precision of the tool he held, was a paradox that Ethan's logical, transactional mind could not comprehend. It was a challenge, a dare, and a grand absurdity. Ethan felt his superior intellect being questioned by a man who had nothing but a worn-out wrench. He felt the rage he had bottled up since the car broke down begin to boil over. The meeting, which had started as a simple nuisance, was now an insult to his very existence. He looked at his watch. The meeting was now a lost cause. But a new game had presented itself. He would not just dismiss this man, he would humiliate him. He would let him try, let him fail, and then he would leave him in the dust of his own failure. He folded the $100 bill and put it back in his wallet. "All right, maestro," Ethan sneered, a cruel glint in his eye. "You want to play? Let's play. You have 1 hour. If you fix it, I'll give you $1,000. If you don't, you get nothing. Deal?" The maestro didn't reply. He just knelt beside the car, his single tool a silent answer. The game had begun, and Ethan Sterling was about to learn a very expensive lesson. The challenge was laid out, a $1,000 wager against a single, worn torque wrench. Ethan leaned against the hood of his disabled supercar, his arms crossed, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. He checked his watch, the diamond-studded bezel glinting under the faint moonlight. "Tick-tock," he muttered under his breath, as if addressing the silent man who was now kneeling beside the car's front fender. This was going to be a quick, embarrassing lesson. The man, this maestro, was a fool, and fools were meant to be fleeced, a principle Ethan had built his entire career on. He had already mentally composed the story he would tell his friends later, a tale of the bizarre encounter he'd had with a delusional vagrant who thought he could fix a bespoke Italian hypercar with a single tool. But the man wasn't just kneeling, he was working. He didn't pop the hood with the dramatic flourish Ethan's own mechanic would. Instead, he reached under the chassis and, with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful, located the access panel for the fuel pump relay. It was an obscure spot, one that even Ethan, the owner of the car, wasn't aware of. Marcus didn't seem to care about the dirt or the grime. His hands, though calloused and grimy, moved with a surgical precision that was at odds with his appearance. He didn't use any fancy diagnostic tools. He just listened. He put his ear to the cold metal, a hand on the frame, his eyes closed in deep concentration. For a full minute he was a statue, a man communing with a machine. Ethan watched, his grin fading into a look of sheer bewilderment. Marcus opened his eyes. He reached into his leather pouch and with the torque wrench he began to work. But instead of simply loosening a bolt, he did something entirely unexpected. He didn't try to replace anything. He was carefully, painstakingly, adjusting the tension of a wire, a subtle twist here, a minuscule turn there. It was like watching a sculptor at work on a masterpiece, each movement deliberate and meaningful. He was bypassing the fried solenoid, creating a temporary but functional connection. He was using his wrench as a lever, as a tensioner, as a percussive instrument to tap a stubborn component into submission. He was improvising, a skill born not of a textbook, but of decades of lived experience. The silence of the night was broken only by the soft click of metal on metal and the low hum of Marcus's focused breathing. Ethan's arrogance was slowly being replaced by a gnawing fascination. He had seen his own mechanics, men in pristine white lab coats, surrounded by millions of dollars of diagnostic equipment, struggle with lesser issues. This man, with nothing but a single wrench and a lifetime of knowledge, was doing the impossible. He was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, and Ethan, a man who prided himself on solving problems, was completely baffled. He took a step closer, his hands dropping from his chest to his sides. He could feel the cold logic of his world crumbling around him. The man wasn't a fool, he was a craftsman. Just then a bead of sweat trickled down Marcus's temple. He grunted, straining against a particularly stubborn connection. His body was not what it once was and the effort was visible. But he didn't give up. He adjusted his grip, applied a gentle pressure and finally with a soft click the connection was made. He stood up, his back straight and dusted off his hands. He didn't look at Ethan. He just walked to the driver's side door, opened it and got in. The silence was agonizing. Ethan held his breath, waiting for the sound that would either confirm his worst fears or restore his sense of superiority. Marcus turned the key. For a split second nothing happened. Ethan felt a jolt of vindication. "I knew it," he almost said, the words forming on his lips. Then a low rumble, a tentative cough, and then a smooth, powerful roar. The engine of the hypercar, a symphony of internal combustion, came to life. The sound was not just a sound, it was a triumphant blast, a sonic victory over logic, arrogance, and prejudice. The car, his mechanical avatar of success, was alive again. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the road ahead, and the man inside the car was bathed in a golden glow. The maestro had returned. Ethan was speechless. His mouth hung open, his mind a blank slate. He stared at the man who had just performed a miracle. He hadn't used a computer, a hoist, or a spare part. He had used his hands and his mind. This was not a lucky guess, it was an act of genius. The 1-hour timer had not even reached 30 minutes. The $1,000 he had offered now felt like a grotesque insult. Marcus stepped out of the car, its engine purring softly, a satisfied hum that seemed to mock Ethan's stunned silence. "She's fine for now," Marcus said, his voice as calm and steady as before. "But you'll want to replace the whole fuel pump relay soon. It's a temporary fix." He reached into his pouch and carefully put his wrench away. He then began to walk away as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Wait," Ethan said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Wait." He took a few clumsy steps forward, fumbling for his wallet. "The money. Here." He held out a handful of crisp $100 bills, more than the agreed-upon 1,000. Marcus didn't take it. He just shook his head. "A deal is a deal," Marcus said. "I fixed it. You owe me 1,000. He looked at Ethan, and this time, there was a new look in his eyes, not sorrow but a deep understanding. He was no longer a beggar on the street. He was a professional, a master of his trade, and he wouldn't accept charity. Ethan stood there, the bills trembling in his hand, a man used to buying his way out of problems, now facing a man who could not be bought. His world, once so predictable and controlled, had just been turned upside down, and the engine's soft purr was the only thing filling the void. Ethan stood on the roadside, a forgotten handful of $100 bills now as useless as the car had been just moments ago. The engine's low, confident hum was the only sound in the night, a constant, mocking reminder of his humiliation. His mind, usually a fortress of cold, calculated logic, was in a state of chaos. The man, the maestro, was walking away, a silent, dignified figure disappearing into the darkness. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan felt a loss of control, a profound sense of helplessness. It wasn't just a car that had been fixed, it was his entire worldview that had been dismantled and reassembled by a man he had so casually dismissed. The man's skill was a form of wealth that Ethan could not quantify, could not manipulate, and could not buy. It was a raw, undeniable talent that stood outside the rigged game he had spent his life winning. He had to do something. He couldn't let him go. This wasn't about the money or the car anymore. It was about an opportunity. Ethan had an uncanny knack for identifying value where others saw none. He had built his empire by recognizing undervalued assets. A failing snack brand, a struggling beverage company, a food truck with a cult following. He would acquire them, optimize their operations, and turn them into gold. This man was the ultimate undervalued asset, a relic of a past he didn't understand, a master craftsman with a skill that was all but extinct. He saw not a beggar, but a genius, a potential partner in a venture he couldn't yet define. He sprinted to the driver's side door and slid into the seat, the leather feeling foreign and unfamiliar against his legs. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life with the smooth violence he was used to. He pulled away from the shoulder and drove slowly, catching up to the man who was still walking down the road without a glance back. He pulled up alongside him and rolled down the passenger window. "Get in," Ethan said, his voice stripped of all arrogance, sounding almost like a plea. Marcus stopped and looked at the car. His face was a stoic mask, a study in indifference. He looked at Ethan, and for the first time Ethan saw the wisdom and the pain in his eyes. "I'm not going to your fancy house," Marcus said, his voice flat. "I know," Ethan replied, his voice still uncharacteristically soft. "I'm not asking you to. I'm taking you to a hotel. You can get a room, get a meal, a hot shower." Marcus shook his head. "I don't need your charity." "This isn't charity," Ethan countered, his business instincts kicking in. "This is a business proposition. I don't know what you're doing out here on the road, but I know what you are. You're a prodigy. And you're not for sale. But you can be my partner. I want to build a business with you. I have the money, the infrastructure, and the connections. You have the genius. We can build something that will make the world take notice. Something that will make them remember who you are." Marcus let out a short, hollow laugh that held no humor. "I had all that once. I was the best. But when they found out I was black, they didn't care about my genius. They just wanted to tear me down." His voice cracked slightly with old pain. "You think you're different? You're just another rich white guy who wants to use me." He continued walking, his back to Ethan. Ethan's heart sank. The words were a bitter truth he had never faced. He had never considered himself a racist, but he had lived in a world where race didn't matter because he had never had to face the consequences of it. He was a man who lived in a vacuum of privilege, and this man was forcing him to look outside of it for the first time. "I don't have to be," Ethan said, his voice low and sincere. "I can't change the past, but I can help you build a new future. A future where you get the respect you deserve, the respect you earned with your hands and your mind." Marcus stopped walking and turned around slowly. He looked at Ethan, a man whose every action, every word, every posture screamed power and privilege, now sitting in his car with a pleading look on his face. He saw no more mocking, no more arrogance. He saw a man who was genuinely, albeit selfishly, in awe of his talent. Marcus had spent his life being judged by the color of his skin, and now, for the first time in a very long time, he was being judged on the merit of his work. It was a strange and powerful thing to see, and it resonated with a part of him he thought had long since died. "I need to know your story," Ethan said, a newfound understanding in his eyes. "I need to know what happened to you. We're not doing this as a business deal, we're doing this as two people who have something to give to each other. I'll give you a fresh start, and in return, you'll teach me something about humility." He held out his hand across the passenger seat, not as a wealthy man offering a handout, but as a man offering an honest, albeit risky, partnership. It was a moment of true, unspoken understanding, a silent agreement to a new path. Marcus looked at the hand, then at Ethan's earnest face. The pain in his eyes was still there, but now there was a flicker of something else, hope, cautious but undeniable. He took a deep breath, his body visibly relaxing as he opened the passenger door and slid into the car. He didn't say a word, just closed the door and let his gaze drift to the passing streetlights. Ethan drove on in the peaceful, comfortable silence, his mind now racing with a different kind of calculation. The $1,000 he had paid was nothing. The real payment was the lesson he had just been taught. He was no longer a king on the road. He was a student, and his new teacher was a man who had nothing but a wrench and a lifetime of hard-won knowledge. The game was no longer about wealth and status, but about trust and a shared vision, and Ethan Sterling was more than ready to play. The next morning, Ethan Sterling drove Marcus to a sprawling, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a cavernous space, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten projects. The air hung heavy with the smell of dust and disuse, a stark contrast to the sterile, polished world Ethan inhabited. Marcus stepped out of the car, his eyes sweeping over the desolate landscape. This wasn't a workshop, it was a mausoleum. "I own the property," Ethan explained, his voice echoing in the vast space. "It's been sitting here for years. It's yours. We can have it renovated, get all the equipment you need, a proper office." Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "No." He walked to the center of the floor, his worn shoes scuffing against the concrete. "We don't need fancy. We need to work." He pointed to a small, isolated corner of the warehouse, a spot that was miraculously less cluttered than the rest. "Just get me the basics. A lift, a good compressor, a set of tools. Not the fancy ones, just the ones that work. We'll build the rest as we go." Ethan was taken aback. He was used to people wanting the best, the most expensive, the most luxurious. This man was a riddle, a paradox he was only beginning to understand. He had to suppress his instinct to simply buy everything and instead listen to Marcus's quiet authority. "All right," Ethan conceded, a flicker of a smile on his face. "The basics it is." Over the next few weeks, Ethan watched in silent awe as Marcus transformed the small, dusty corner into a functional workshop. The tools that arrived were exactly as Marcus had requested: sturdy, reliable, and without a single frill. Marcus didn't need to read a manual to know what a tool was for. His hands remembered. He worked with a quiet intensity, his movements economical and precise. He was no longer a hunched, defeated man. He was a maestro in his element, a conductor in an orchestra of steel. Ethan spent hours watching him, a man who had built a food empire now learning the intricate dance of a wrench and a socket. He brought his personal cars to the garage not for repairs but for Marcus to look at. He would find some tiny, almost imperceptible flaw and bring it to Marcus's attention, only to watch in fascination as the old mechanic diagnosed and corrected the problem with a few deft movements. Marcus was a teacher without a lesson plan, a mentor without a degree. He taught Ethan that genius wasn't about expensive tools or polished degrees. It was about a deep, intuitive understanding of your craft. The first paying customer was a test. A beat-up, sputtering Ford pickup, its engine wheezing like an old man with a cough. Ethan was about to send it away, but Marcus shook his head. "Every car deserves to run right," he said. He spent hours on that old truck, not just fixing the engine but fine-tuning it, adjusting every single component until it purred like a contented kitten. The owner, an old farmer, was so stunned he couldn't speak. He just handed Marcus a crumpled $20 bill, his eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus took it, his face unreadable, and handed it to Ethan. "Put it in the books," he said. "We have a start." Ethan had built his empire on a foundation of massive deals, market takeovers, and million-dollar contracts. Now he was building a new empire on a $20 bill, a beat-up truck, and a handshake. It was a humbling experience, a return to the basics that he had long forgotten. He was learning to appreciate the small victories, the quiet dignity of a job well done. He wasn't a CEO here, he was an apprentice. He was no longer just a spectator to Marcus's genius. He was a participant. As the weeks turned into months, the garage began to hum with life. Word of the maestro spread like wildfire. The owner of the old Ford told his neighbor, who told his brother-in-law, and soon the garage was filled with cars of all shapes and sizes. Not the luxury cars Ethan was used to, but the cars of everyday people. single mothers, struggling students, retired factory workers. Marcus treated every car with the same reverence, the same quiet, intense focus he had shown Ethan's hypercar. He was not just a mechanic, he was a healer of machines. Ethan, meanwhile, was doing what he did best. He was building the business. He set up an online booking system, a social media account, and a professional website. He hired a young, enthusiastic assistant who was eager to learn from a master. He was no longer just an observer, he was a partner. He was watching his new venture, built on a foundation of humility and trust, grow into something far more rewarding than anything he had ever created. He was no longer the king of a sterile, controlled empire. He was a student in a garage full of ghosts, and he was finally, truly learning. Months bled into a year, and the forgotten warehouse transformed from a garage of ghosts into a bustling workshop humming with life. The small corner Marcus had claimed had grown to encompass the entire front half of the building, each bay occupied by a vehicle waiting for the maestro's touch. The old Ford pickup was long gone, replaced by a diverse clientele, not just the everyday drivers from the neighborhood, but now also vintage car collectors, racing enthusiasts, and even a few of Ethan's old colleagues from the city. The word of mouth had spread like a carefully planned marketing campaign, driven by one simple, unshakable truth. If Marcus couldn't fix it, it couldn't be fixed. Ethan Sterling had found a new rhythm to his life, one far removed from the sterile boardrooms and endless financial spreadsheets. He spent his days in the garage, not as a CEO but as a partner, his tailored suits replaced by a pair of well-worn jeans and a work shirt. He managed the books, scheduled appointments, and handled the growing stream of clients with an affable professionalism that disarmed even the most skeptical customers. He built a reputation for fairness and transparency, a stark contrast to the cutthroat business world he had left behind. He was learning to find joy in tangible success, in the simple, satisfying sound of a perfectly tuned engine. He had built his first empire on abstract concepts and numbers, but this one was built on tangible labor and the trust of a community. They hired their first mechanic, a young, eager man named Javier, who had all the certifications in the world but none of the intuition Marcus possessed. Instead of giving him a manual, Marcus gave him a wrench. "You don't listen to the engine with your ears," he told him, "you listen with your hands." Marcus taught him to feel the vibrations, to hear the subtle dissonance in a cylinder, to anticipate the needs of the machine. It was a rigorous, old-school apprenticeship, and Javier quickly realized that he was being taught by a master, a man whose hands held a library of knowledge no textbook could ever contain. The apprentice system wasn't just about passing on knowledge, it was about honoring a legacy that had almost been lost. Marcus himself was a changed man. The defeated slump of his shoulders had straightened, replaced by the confident posture of a man who had found his purpose again. The pain and sorrow in his eyes had not completely disappeared, the scars of the past were too deep for that, but they were now overlaid with a new sense of pride. He was no longer a victim, he was a creator, a healer. He walked with a quiet dignity, his hands, once symbols of his past profession, now a beacon of his present success. His life, once a requiem, was now a symphony of steel and oil, a beautiful and complex composition that was all his own. One afternoon, a sleek, black Porsche Panamera pulled into the lot. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, emerged and looked around with an air of disbelief. Is this Sterling & Sons' garage?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. Ethan walked over, a smile on his face. "Just Sterling and Marcus now, but yes, this is the place. How can we help you?" The man looked at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Ethan Sterling? The food guy? What in the world?" Ethan just smiled. "A long story. What can we do for you?" The man explained that his car was making a strange clicking noise that 3 different mechanics couldn't diagnose. Marcus, who had been working on a vintage Mustang, walked over and simply put his hand on the hood of the Porsche. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then his eyes snapped open. "It's a broken piston ring on cylinder 4, he said without hesitation. "It's a hairline fracture. We'll need to replace the whole piston. It'll take about 2 days." The man was floored. How did you know that?" "The dealer said it was a faulty fuel injector." Marcus just shrugged. "The car told me," he said. The man's disbelief turned into awe, and he handed Ethan his keys without another word. The 2 men stood there, watching the man walk away, a silent, unspoken understanding passing between them. They had built something real, something that transcended status, race, and prejudice. They were no longer two men from different worlds. They were a team, a partnership forged in the crucible of a broken car and a shared moment of humility. The most profound change wasn't in the business but in the men themselves. Ethan, the architect of a soulless empire, had learned the value of a single, honest day's work. Marcus, the maestro whose music had been silenced by the world's prejudice, had found his voice again, not in the roar of a crowd, but in the quiet, contented purr of an engine he had brought back to life. Their success was not measured in profits and assets, but in the quiet pride of a job well done, and in the profound respect they had for each other. 2 years after their fateful encounter on the lonely stretch of highway, the dilapidated warehouse had been replaced by a sprawling, state-of-the-art automotive facility. It was an architectural marvel of polished concrete, gleaming steel, and natural light, a testament to both Marcus's mechanical genius and Ethan's business acumen. The business, now formally known as the Sterling Avery Motor Works, was a roaring success, a beacon of excellence in an industry often plagued by mediocrity. The bays were filled with an array of vehicles, from vintage classics and modern luxury cars to even the occasional muscle car, each one receiving the same meticulous attention. The once dusty corner where Marcus had started his new life was now a dedicated teaching bay, where he mentored a small, hand-picked team of apprentices, passing on not just his skills but his philosophy. Marcus was no longer just a mechanic, he was an institution. The local media had written profiles on him, calling him a legend reborn. He had been featured in trade magazines, his story a powerful narrative of resilience and redemption. He carried himself with a quiet authority, a man who had been to the bottom of the abyss and had clawed his way back to the top, not with vengeance but with dignity. He wore a crisp, dark blue jumpsuit with the company logo, a subtle nod to the professional he had always been. The pain in his eyes was still there, a constant reminder of the past, but it was now tempered with a profound sense of purpose. He was building something that had been taken from him, not just a business but a legacy, a living testament to the power of one man's talent and unwavering spirit. He was teaching the next generation that true mastery wasn't just about turning a wrench, it was about respect, about listening to the machine, and about honoring the craft itself. Ethan, meanwhile, had found an unlooked-for kind of contentment. He still managed his food company, but the soulless pursuit of profit had lost its allure. The work was no longer about winning a game, but about building something real, something that had a tangible impact on the world. He had a newfound respect for the simple elegance of a well-oiled machine, for the honest sweat on a man's brow, and for the quiet wisdom of a person who had truly suffered. He had learned that wealth was a flimsy, fragile thing, but that character, talent, and respect were the only things that truly lasted. He saw the world differently now, not in terms of assets and liabilities, but in terms of people and potential. His relationship with Marcus had blossomed into a deep and abiding friendship, a bond built on mutual respect and shared experience. They were an unlikely pair, the polished CEO and the weathered mechanic, but in the crucible of their shared venture, they had become equals. One afternoon, they stood together in the central bay, their hands resting on the hood of a meticulously restored 1965 Mustang GT. It was Marcus's pet project, a passion that had brought him back to his true self. The car was a thing of beauty, a perfect symphony of steel and chrome, and it hummed with the contented power of a perfectly tuned engine. "You know," Ethan said, his voice low, "I was a different man back then. I saw you and just saw a problem to be solved, a nuisance on my path." Marcus turned to him, his eyes holding a gentle wisdom. "You had to see me that way. It was the only way you knew how to see the world. But now you see a mechanic and equal. That's all anyone ever really wants, isn't it? To be seen." Ethan nodded slowly, a hint of a smile on his face. He reached out and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I had a $1,000 car and $1 million problem that night. You fixed the car. But you fixed more than that, didn't you? You fixed me." Marcus just shrugged, a small, humble gesture that spoke volumes. He looked at the Mustang, then at the apprentices working in the bay, their faces a portrait of concentration and focus. He looked at the bustling office, the smiling clients, the success that was all around him. He had lost everything, but in losing it all, he had found himself again. He had been given a second chance, not just at his profession but at his life. He was no longer running from the past. He was building a new future on its foundation. The road was ahead of them, long and winding, but for the first time in a very long time, both men were looking forward to the journey. They were no longer two people from different worlds, but two partners, two friends, two men whose lives had been forever changed by a broken car, a helping hand, and a quiet, profound act of humility. The engine of their success wasn't just made of metal and oil. It was built on a foundation of trust, a shared vision, and a deep respect for the power of human resilience. The maestro's music had returned, and this time, the world was finally ready to listen. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.